Good evening, everybody. Welcome to round 2, simGT, apologies, and it is at COTA tonight for the 2023.1 season. I'm going to be rushing through this commentator intro because we're already late in starting. Quali is underway and we'll hopefully catch the end of that in a moment. Skipping the track layouts tonight, just to quickly note what the weather forecast will be. As it was prepared for this past week, partly cloudy, and we can see the track in the background at the moment. Looks like the sun will be out. The cloud level will be a bit high, so we never know what that might bring, but the track, or the ambient temperature rather, at 15 degrees Celsius should give us a fairly tepid track to be able to run down some rubber onto it. So now straight to the action. At the moment we do see, oh, well, someone's pulled into the pits. That is Nick Hodgson. But we do see at the top of the times at the moment is Stain. And my times are not yet updating on mine. So that's always good. There we are. So then I do have Marcus Stain right at the top. He's over half a second, 0.67 at the moment that he's above second place. Provisionally, of course, we do still have 5.5 minutes of qualifying to go. So it looks like we made it just in time to see the fastest laps hopefully come down. He is followed in second place at the moment by Johan van der Merwe. Oh, I stand to be corrected. Ryan Barrington-Smith has now popped up into P2, less than a tenth to the pole sitter at 0.092 seconds. And then we have Johan van der Merwe following in P3, still a 0.67 back from the leader. We go through the field, we do see Peter Oosthuizen racing for VXR Viper in P4, and Alex Buitendag, that is a nameless team, at least on my screen, in P5 provisionally at the moment. All of those top 5 within a second of the leader. So yeah, we'll hopefully see some action coming down in the last couple of minutes of quali. We'll try and find somebody who's on a fast lap right now in some faster sector times. Do see not Rowan Heineke, it was Brandon Holthausen who looked like he had a decent first sector in there. Delta is low, it might be an outlap at the moment. Let's switch to Hardus Buesa for the Talk Academy. And he's on a flyer by the look of his times. He is about half a second down on his time, so not going to improve too much, but any improvement is an improvement as far as quali goes. And as I say that, he has pulled out of it. So we'll try and switch to the leaders again and see anybody who is maybe on a push lap. Delta times are slow in updating on mine, but we do see that Johan van der Merwe looks like he's about a tenth up on his current time. That's not going to get him as close to P2 as he would like, so he's definitely going to have to improve that. Lawrence Sterner, though, is almost 4 tenths up on his time, so this could see a positional jump of 1 or 2 places perhaps. We'll see as he now is on the back straight and headed towards the tight left-hander, which is perhaps one of the only overtaking zones traditionally. But that starts what would be probably the most technical section of the circuit. A couple of corners to follow that are unlike any other. You've got a double right-hander where you are fully missing the second apex, into a left-hander, almost double left-hander we can call it, where you are again missing the first apex this time to get a tighter second apex. There we see it straightening out, and then into a triple apex corner as turns, I'm stretching my memory here, 15 and 16. No, I don't feel confident about that. Let's say 16 and 17. Of course, there are no corner names on COTA. Favors itself as turn 1 to end. There's nothing to brag about as far as history goes here, but it's always been a good track for racing, no matter which car you rock up in. Sterner still looks to be down on his delta, and there we are. He's popped up into P5, so just not getting enough to get the P4 from Oosthuizen there, but he is the highest running Ferrari in this case, so perhaps a decent time for the car on this track as well. And just looking across, I do have all of the top 6 bar Sterner at the moment, top 5 bar Sterner, who are actually improving. There's Oosthuizen's got about a 1/10.5 that he's improved, although he just has lost some of that. Your top 2 are also on improving laps very slightly. Do have Marcus Steyn at about, he's just lost what he did have in a 1/10.5. We'll see where that might have happened. Okay, that's coming through the S's. Always tricky. You get slightly offline in the S's and you can kiss your time goodbye. Ryan Barrington-Smith is up a 1/10, which is what he needs to be able to put for pole position right now. But he is going back and forth in that delta, back to a 1/10 again. So we'll see what he can do in the last sector here. He's coming up to the double right-hander now that is for flat out in a wing car almost, but it's going to be quite tricky to get your throttle right through here to get optimum line and speed, and especially in the race, that'll be the corner that eats your tires. So it'll be interesting on how much speed they can carry through there, when to risk it, when to not. You'd expect them to want to save as much as they can for the push laps. And I'm going to do my best to start monitoring the chat as well, so please let me know if there is any discrepancies in the sounds right now. I do actually see I've had the engine sounds muted until now, so that should make up for that. We'll get some wonderful harmonics from this array of manufacturers. Having said that, I do see the top 3 positions pinned to Porsche cars, which is slightly disappointing to see as a Ferrari fan myself, but variety is the name of the game, especially through GT3 fields. You love to see it, how there are so many different cars, so many different techniques to drive each car, especially the Porsche being a prime example of that. You really have to learn the nuances of each vehicle to be able to get the most out of them. And I see Ryan looks like he might have pulled out of the lap. Marcus Steyn improved, and that'll be the end of qualifying session. There's still a few runners. Right now it looks like the highest of those and Brandon Holtzhausen also having pulled out of his time. We do see that both Peter Oosthuizen and Jeremy de Villiers still on flyers. Jeremy's starting the final sector. Okay. Sorry, that's Peter Oosthuizen. He's coming down the back straight, and Jeremy is coming through the double right-hander to the last 2 corners. And exits the final corner full throttle to the line. He is pulling over, so that will be the end of his run. We do still have a handful of runners, although I can't see anyone is on an improved time right now, so that could speak to the track getting a little more difficult. Even though it gets more rubbered in, the heat might be turning up a little bit. I see it did go up a degree or 2 towards the end. So that might just speak to the drivers having put in their optimal times beforehand, not being forced into making the most out of it at the end, but you never know on what you've done before, whether it can be improved, especially in quali. You get into that mindset of full tilt to the limit. Sterner will still be coming through to complete his lap, but he is slightly down and pulls out. He was only about 0.003 of a second up on his time at best there, and that will be the end of our quali. So we do have Marcus Steyn in pole position for the grid, Ryan Barrington-Smith on the front row with him alongside in P2. I missed Nick Hodgson sneaking into P3 at some point there, so he's done well there to start the second row. Alongside him will be Alex Buitendach, and then Brandon Holthausen and Van der Merwe filling up the third row. We do have then Peter Oosthuizen and Jeremy de Villiers taking up row 4. Lawrence Sterner and Chris Heineke will complete row 5, and that's your top 10 to start. We do have 20 seconds until the start time. Looks like the partly cloudy cover wasn't much to speak of, so this will be a clear race. The track might well heat up towards the end of that. We'll see how this progresses in the opening laps. Of course, T1 will be where the majority of the action happens for the first lap. We'll hope the drivers can get through there cleanly. As they pull away, there will be, of course, one mandatory formation lap as per standard requirement, and then it will be a rolling start for the green lights next time round. And casting an eye to the chat, we have a good luck for Hardus, we have a come on Brandon, and a go number 76 Superbike champ Johan Jr. And a hi to Robert McCall coming out as well, who said, how's it back? Okay, he's not racing tonight, clearly. My mistake. But then a couple of... Oh, there's Robert McCall's actually got killed by load shedding, unfortunately. So I see there were a few of the drivers that unfortunately did have to pull out. It is what it is in our wonderful land, where load shedding is, let's say, one of the many unique aspects of our country. So unfortunately, that does take away a lot of drivers' abilities to race on race night. But it is what it is. We all have to deal with it at some stage. So hopefully those drivers do get the chance to then race and make up their points that they would have been forced to drop during load shedding rounds. We have the leader on the back straight now, so we are about halfway through that formation lap. And any of those that might have been out of the loop for the first round as well, I will hopefully be the full-time commentator for simGT at least this season. Unfortunately, I do have work commitments that allow me to only get home from about 8:15, 20 past 8 at the earliest, best case scenario. So we will unfortunately be starting late into qualifying as we did tonight most nights, and hopefully at the very least being able to make the green light for race start. But it is what it is. We have both our gents, Sass and Ryan, I believe both of them. I must double check with Sass, but I believe both of them are racing in the series in... Actually, I'll take that back. Sass would be in Division 1. I know Ryan is in Division 2, so their commitments obviously not allowing them, or rather, let's say they would rather focus on the racing for at least one of the series, but then they have left the reins to me to take over for simGT for the season at least. Hopefully, work permitting, I will be able to cover all of the action both tonight and going forward to the last round of the season. And we are now rounding the final bend, and there looks to be a little bit of a wide outside line having to be taken, so it might well be that Marcus Stain gets a bit of a clean run. It all depends on how they get to the line as well and approach. As we know, ACC forces you into pit limiter mode pretty much for your formation lap, so there is not much to be gained, or to pull back rather, once you lose too much. It does all of the modulating for you, and we are crossing the line, and green, we are racing. Coming up to T1, Marcus Stain looks like he's nipped into that lead to hold this pretty strongly. He's got the inside line, but he has run quite wide, left the door open to both Ryan Barrington-Smith and Nick Hodgson. It's now 3 wide as we exit turn 1. It is 2 wide now, it looks like. Is that Nick that has snuck into the lead? I believe it is, yes. So Nick Hodgson has taken the lead. That was a very, very, let's say, calm moment where it was 3 wide going through the start of the S's and down from T1. Marcus Stain will be a bit disappointed he let himself get too wide there. That's one where you always, the wider you go, the more open the door will be for anybody to cut back in. Plenty of room as this track is quite wide. We come out of the S's and approaching the hairpin to start the back straight, and it's still Nick in the lead. He's being closely followed though by Ryan Barrington-Smith, and of course Marcus Stain right behind him will want to get that position back. He'll be chomping at the bit to gain back what he's lost. Looking further down the field, we haven't had too many position changes. One of the winners of the let's say grid shuffle at T1 was Johan van der Merwe. He's found himself in P4, as well as Chris Heineke, who was up from P10 all the way to P7 at the moment. But your winner from the first lap looks to be Nick Hodgson, who's climbed his way from P3 all the way to prime spot in P1 as they exit towards the double right-hander and in the third sector. Not much of a gap to be had yet. About half a second between P1, P2, and again a half a second to P3. The biggest gap we can find right now is between P4 and 5. So it looks like, oh, he's run wide a bit on the second to last corner. He's let both of them up the inside. Will it be 3? Side by side, but he looks like he's got a clean enough exit to take the position ahead. He's fallen back into P3. Commentators curse perhaps having called him the winner of the lap before that completed. So Ryan Barrington-Smith, your new race leader, he's really taken a dig into his opportunities on that opening lap, and especially finishing that. He's held good pace so far. He's got Marcus Stain just behind him though at under 4 tenths at the moment. Nick will be kicking himself a bit, but he definitely is not, by no means, down and out. He'll be fighting to earn back that place that he so willingly gave up in that second to last corner. I think characteristic of that on slightly cold and under pressure tires on the first lap, it's very easy coming out of the double right-hander, having put all the speed you can into that, to then run a little bit wide at the second to last corner. But also kudos to the 2 men behind who were ready to take advantage of that very quickly. As we see, they are still lined up pretty close to each other, less than 4 tenths in it between 2 and 3, and just under half a second between 1 and 2. So they're not going to let each other get away. Johan van der Merwe there in the background is still holding on to the train, or the toe rather. He's less than a second as well. Brandon Holthausen has made up some time, so that 1.5 second gap we saw has come down to 1 second now. So nobody really pulling away or checking out, as it were. We do look further down the field. We do have Alex Buitendach, who's also about a second behind. A little bit of separation starting to form. Chris Heineke again at 1.2 seconds back. But I'm remiss to say I don't want to take my eyes off this lead pack at the moment, because they are barely split by a couple of tenths. Having seen that now, though, it looks like Ryan Barrington-Smith will see the delta update towards the end of the lap, but he has actually pulled up a little bit of a gap. Looks like he's found himself with some nice space between him and P2, but of course he needs to maintain that all the way up to and down the back straight to get out of that toe. Otherwise I could easily see the two behind close up that gap again. Just looking further down the field, we've got a bit of a positional change. Trying to figure out who that was, but we had a shuffle in the midfield as well. We'll try give them some track time. It looks like the leaders have got a little bit of separation. It might allow us to cast our eyes further down the field. Looking now at Gavin Scruton, he's found himself in P4, and there is again a little bit of separation. Let's have a look at Sean Loureiro. He's probably the closest of the midfield now. It was under 4/10. It's just popped up a little bit to under half a second between him and Paul Venter ahead. And that is quite a livery, I'd say, as well. Eye-catching if ever you did see one. That's in the Honda NSX, driving for LNR Expressly Slow. So that is an interesting nickname as well. But the Slow Express, perhaps, is doing everything he can to shuffle off away from Sean Loureiro. That gap is still holding. It's actually dropped to 10th now to under 4/10. So Sean is looking to try and get latch onto the back of him, as Venter is also trying to latch onto the back of Boyce as well, because he's lost, or at least there's been some separation of about 2 seconds there forming so far. Just casting an eye back up to the lead times and pack, they also are still separated by just under a second. So I think this track might be quite difficult to follow in. I know my time spent in, let's say, more aerodynamically involved and downforce inducing vehicles would be difficult to follow either way, even with a higher downforce. I can only imagine it does get tricky with the tire pressures coming through a lot of these faster corners, and especially how the tires would load up in the third sector as well as the start of the second through the S's. Following through the S's would be the biggest challenge for all of these drivers, I would think, but everybody has their good and bad corners. So Paul Venter has managed to close up that ground, and in doing so he's also pulled away from Sean Loureiro a bit. Let's try and take a spot up to, I see Brandon Holthausen he's just jumped back down a bit to a second now gap. But live on the timings, he is under 4/10 to Jan van der Merwe ahead. Sorry, that is his delta. He's 8/10 now to Jan van der Merwe ahead, and behind him Alex Buitendach is 7/10, just shy of Holthausen as well. That's P5 and P6 respectively. And I do see Holthausen is in some corners closing down that distance, but in others losing it. So it would be something to be able to get all of that over a lap and nail out your best, catch the back of those cars in front. See Chris Heineke has also dropped a little bit off that inside that second mark of Alex Buitendach. And having witnessed some of these gents, Chris Heineke being one that I've witnessed them drive before, and the pace they can extract out of the car, I think that speaks highly to our top 10 drivers right now on how they are all able to really maintain quite a high level of pace through this lap, especially. I find this to be one of the most challenging circuits. I can only imagine a weight transition of a GT car makes it that much more challenging. But we are seeing a little bit of a gap open up between most of the field now. Brandon Holthausen for LT Racing Chic SA is still in P5 with probably our smallest margin to the car in front of 8/10. Alex Buitendach just shorter on that. In the unnamed team, he is 7/10 behind Brandon Holthausen. Casting an eye back, actually, we do see that Paul Venter is half a second behind now, so he has closed that ground down, and that's dropped even more from the visuals on the screen. Paul Venter for that Expressly Slow LNR team has done well to lose Sean Loureiro behind and catch up to Hardus Boycer without much hesitation. And you can see he's gone up the inside. Hardus has perhaps made an error there, run wide a bit, and he's snatched that place without a second thought to it. So he's done very well indeed. Although it's not yet updated on my timings, it is official that Paul Venter is ahead of Hardus Boycer there, if not updated yet. So that would be P8 for Paul, and a very well-earned one. He's maintained his pace quite consistently since the start of the race. A little bit of separation, he's clawed it all back. He's dropped P10 behind him and managed to claim P8 as well in the process. And there doesn't seem to be too much change going on with the times aside from this little battle we've seen. Hardus is still holding on to the back of him, and a man who did have pace last week, 3 weeks back, from the bits of the stream I was able to watch during my technical failures, or bits of the race rather. So it's something that we're going to see, I think, throughout this season, where the drivers will have different strengths and weaknesses. They will find themselves a bit faster or a bit slower at each track. Now that we perhaps have the strategy nuances out of the way with how the pit stops will play out, I think a lot of these drivers, you can almost call them quite seasoned in this series as well. So they would be quite familiar with this car and the strategies that go alongside that. I would think that strategy today won't allow you as much chance perhaps to extend those tires, but you never know. I've seen magic performed by a lot of these drivers before, and I'd expect to see something similar tonight as well. Marcus Steyn might be on a bit of a charge. He's brought down the time by about 2/10. That could have also been a slight error from Ryan up front, but he's done quite well to bring that timing down. Of course, the tower that you're seeing on the top left does not update live, unfortunately, so I will do my best to keep you updated with the between laps, what the delta looks like. So that actually has what he did drop previously, although sector time has got him at. Having looked at the gaps, I think my delta is not updating. That would be the case. So I see some of them are updating, some of them are not. That's always a pleasant experience when it comes to watching those delta times. So I'll correct myself to say Marcus Steyn has dropped under a second, but they have both also checked out a little bit from Nick Hodgson behind. So wondering what's happened to Nick Hodgson's pace since he was looking right up there, but from the second to last corner on the first lap, giving up those two positions, has just looked to go a bit backwards. He's also given Johan van der Merwe a bit of confidence to perhaps catch him. So the motivation is there for him. He's not seeing him pull away, and he's slowly bringing down that gap as well. As he crosses the line, we'll see that dip under the 1.2 second mark. And I did miss the positional change. We'll see if a replay does work on this. Would be interesting to try and find out exactly how long that would be. But we'll take a little guess and see if we can get the positional change on the chart. No, it looks like it's already done there. But Chris Heineke has now found himself up into P6 while that replay is having its chance to finish. I'm going to look to try and restart my director to get a more accurate feel on the live timings as well. And that looks a bit better. So Chris Heineke's done well to get himself up into P6 there. That's moving up from P10 starting on the grid. So that's probably our highest position gainer right now, bar any others that I have not noticed in the mid-pack. Speaking of the mid-pack, let's hopefully give someone some action. Yeah, I see Jeremy de Villiers has brought himself within 4/10 of Scruton ahead. So Gavin, while he was pulling away a little bit, Jeremy seems to be closing down that gap. He has got alongside him now and looking to make the move stick down the back straight. Gives that corner does open up a bit to give a little chance around the outside, but unfortunately heads into a double right-hander on the next two. Although, having said that, he's undercut him to fight him back. Gavin Scruton's having none of it. And while he has to unfortunately go the long way around and give up the place through the double right-handers, he's now going to be right on the tail of Jeremy de Villiers and make it known that he wants that place back. Coming onto the main straight, it could, or the pit straight, it could give him a run up to T1. It's also an up-hander, so allows for some very late braking. Although, having said that, it looks like Jeremy might have dropped just enough pace to avoid towing him too harshly. He's still very much within that slipstream, though. We'll see what that McLaren can manage as far as straight line speed goes. And he's definitely made a claim to that P14, has Jeremy de Villiers. So good work there, because he was sitting there for a little while, but has claimed it through, it looked like a little error from Greg Scruton, the smallest of errors, running a bit wide on the through the apex of the hairpin onto the back straight, and he's allowed Jeremy de Villiers into that position. Seeing the times now is Chris Heineke also dropping under a second, so he's decided to get a move on here. He's not settling for just those 4 places, and he did get himself underneath 1 second, so there's gap between himself and P5 Brandon Holthausen. As we see, Marcus Steyn has put up the fastest lap of the race, and he's also come within half a second of Ryan Barrington-Smith. And the gap between those two and Nick Hodgson has now increased to 4 seconds, so they are egging each other on. Marcus pushing Ryan on quite a bit as far as the lap times go, and it seems like we're seeing the best of them come out. Perhaps I'd like to compare that against the quali times, but I didn't get a chance to record that down. 206.2 is the fastest lap of the race for Marcus Steyn, at 206.4 for Ryan Barrington-Smith. So very little in it, and perhaps that 2/10, less than 2/10, tenth and a half between their PBs at the moment is indicative of how Marcus Steyn can and has closed up that gap in the past 2 laps. If he can maintain that pace and get himself alongside is a whole nother story. As we know, catching and passing are 2 very different things, especially on a track like this. Looks like Marcus Steyn has brought that time down to just under half a second at certain points of the delta lines, so he's definitely fighting to try and keep a hang on that. Looking just 2 positions back from him is Johan van der Merwe, also dipping between the second to half a second mark on Nick Hodgson. Nick Hodgson now down to 5.2 seconds behind P2. So he is going backwards slightly, and I think Johan wants to make that known that any more time loss will lead to a risk of losing that position on the podium spots currently. Of course, P3 is prized for that reason. You want to get yourself on the podium points are fairly even, fairly well distributed, let's say, in SRSA. So it leaves everybody with a fight throughout the whole year of championship racing. But of course, that podium champagne always tastes that much sweeter, even in the virtual world. As Johan gets a little bit squirrely coming out the final turn, which will practically eliminate any chance he might have had to push up into T1. But that is also testament to Nick perhaps keeping it cleaner. Nothing can say that there isn't a longer game at play here, especially on a track like this. The more you can eke out your tires and get the most out of them over the course of the stint, perhaps the later you box, the more you allow yourself to be able to push flat out on the next set of tires. I would only imagine that on a track like this, perhaps changing tires is the strategy, although I would just be speaking for myself. I'm not very good at managing tires on a car like this, so I think I would box for tires out of safety more than anything else. But we'll see what some of these drivers can do. As we know that just a little splash or 1 liter minimum fuel that needs to go in, or changing the tires. Of course, taking 1 liter of fuel, carrying a heavier tank, and avoiding changing the tires would be your fastest possible pit strategy that you can play. But of course, still making that work before and after getting into the pit lane would be what matters most. And Nick has found a way to stabilize that gap between himself and Johan van der Merwe. And I do see Marcus Steyn is now really making a charge for that P1 position. He's got himself under 3/10, and he's putting his nose all over the track to make sure Ryan Barrington-Smith is aware of that. So this could be quite a fight right to the end if these two drivers can maintain. Because Ryan Barrington-Smith did look like he was slightly pulling away, but he's lost all of that advantage now. And based on his pace, I would also go as far as to say if Marcus Steyn can get into that P1, I wouldn't expect him to pull away too easily. Ryan may be egged on to take another 10th or 2 off his current PB for the race, and just keep up with it. But having said that, Marcus Steyn has dropped back another half a second, or up to 7/10 from where he was. Also testament to how difficult it is to follow through some of the sections of this track. And casting an eye back now, we might have missed our chance for a proper battle to be had. There's some separation now from Brandon Holthausen in P5, who has dropped looks like about 6 seconds back. Chris Heineke as well, who, as I looked at his delta, did drop violently. He's now dropped off quite a few. That's 3 seconds, and allowed Paul Fenter, another one of the big gainers for the day, to sneak into that P6 position. He's been making his way through the field quite adeptly and has not let up in his pace either. So he's been very consistent. One wonders how much of the tires he would be using, but he's done really well to earn the positions he's taken so far. Let's not forget he also found himself in P10 at a stage and has worked himself right back up into P6 now on track, even if the timing tower does not want to update on the left hand side. And I wonder what Chris Heineke might have picked up in that moment. We, of course, joined him when he was off the track already. Don't know how hard he might have hit any curbs on the way there, or what he might have clipped in between. But that might be indicative of the damage, any damage he might have picked up, seeing that he has found himself dropping off pace suddenly, when previously he was on quite a bit of a charge forward. Seems to have lost that momentum a bit, with something that he might have picked up, or the tires are just coming back to haunt him a bit. Of course, tire wear is one thing, but in ACC, tire pressures and temperatures is also a very big contributing factor. So it's quite easy to feel like you're eking out the tires, but lean on them a bit too hard to maintain your pace. Find yourself in a bit of a unfortunate situation where you need to let up a couple of laps. I don't expect that would be his reason for going wide, but after going wide and picking up quite a bit of pickup off the outside off the track limits, he would have likely had to manage that a bit for the next few corners. He hasn't let Paul Venter drop away from him too quickly yet, and having seen that, Paul Venter is definitely gaining a little bit of time on Brandon Holthausen in up ahead in P5, who at the moment finds himself a man on an island in that LT Racing Chic SA car. He is 4.5 seconds shy of P4, with P6 a further 5 seconds back of him. So his race has suddenly turned lonely. He'll do well to keep himself on pace and not forget that there are still cars around. But you can see the distance gap down the back straight there between himself and both P4 and P6 in front and behind. And giving another quick eyeball towards P2. Again, Marcus Steyn is making a little bit of a charge, trying to make Ryan Barrington-Smith look in those rearview mirrors. Of course, it's times like these when you remind a driver as a crew chief to forget about what's behind you, keep your eyes ahead. But it's impossible in these cases to not take notice of a car whose headlights are reminding you to go faster. And again, showing how difficult it is to follow some of these corners. Strengths and weaknesses once again playing a part perhaps, but I'm sure following and the tire wear and pressure will be playing the bigger contributing factor. Seems like Marcus does have a little bit in him to be able to catch Ryan Barrington-Smith on the exits of the S's, coming down to the hairpin before the back straight. But that would be his best chance at getting an overtake done, bar any mistakes or errors from Ryan Barrington-Smith up front, is to perhaps try and get that toe, get that exit as close as possible to him coming out that hairpin onto the back straight. It's a long one. It's deceivingly shorter in the car, going over the car, going below the valley and over the crest. You don't see the end of the straight until you get onto the crest, but it is quite a long one. If memory serves me, it's a 1.2 mile. Going to go with 1.2 mile back straight, which is a long flat out section. And I'm beginning to think Marcus Steyn's preferred line is on the inside through that double left-hander, as he seems to find himself there quite often. Otherwise, he's just casting out that reminder. Looking back now, they've definitely left Nick Hodgson a bit for dead there. He's now 9 seconds back, but we've also seen Johan van der Merwe sticking to the back of him, half a second off Nick. Relentless in making sure that McLaren can stick up with him. M Cubed Racing 2023. So that is a smart looking McLaren if ever I did see one. Very much not traditional McLaren colors, but it looks good on the car. He's done well with that livery. That gap between, or rather the island that Brandon Holthausen sits in, has remained unchanged. The times are not getting any better to the cars in front and not worsening to the car behind. So he might just have a lonely race ahead of him for now, and to remind himself that there's still time to be had everywhere. But Chris Heineke also is desperate to get that P6 spot back from Paul Venter. He hasn't dropped to a second or below. He's stayed within that 1 second, or less than a second rather, of Paul Venter. So he obviously would like back what he feels he may have lost unnecessarily with running off track earlier. Back behind them is also Alex Buitendag, who's been watching this little push to go up front ahead of him. So he obviously wants to get involved in this. He also finds himself less than a second back from Chris Heineke, so his eyes are ahead there. And I might have just given a bit of a commentator's curse to Chris, because he's now dipped outside of that 1 second mark, allowed Paul Venter to get away slightly, having seen that he's also dropped to under 7/10 to himself and Alex Buitendag behind. That might have again been a slight error that's allowed that time loss to occur. And there's another bit of a gap between P8, P9, P10, just under 2.5 seconds between Hardus Boysa and Alex Buitendag, and then Sean Loureiro also another 3 seconds back. So another man who finds himself in a bit of an island. Well, both of them, Hardus and Sean Loureiro, but as I say that, Hardus has made up some time. We do have one man that's pitted so far, being Ruan Heineke, but the rest are still to pit. It's still a long race to go. We have just passed 45 minutes remaining, so this is a lot to play for. We'll start seeing them around halfway, I would say, as the start of the planned pit stops, but we definitely have a few battles here which will come down to the wire between the second stint, once they have got out of the pit boxes and the strategy cards have been played. And on board now is Christy Simon for one of the Grumpy Monkey cars, Grumpy Monkey Sim Racing. And we do have actually just ahead of that, although my time charts are a bit all over. There we go. So we have Wilfred Robson for Eleanor Cheese and Wine. I must say Eleanor do have some interesting car names, or pair names, let's say. And he was less than 3/10 at a stage between himself and Jeremy de Villiers. That gap has opened up a little more now, but he could well make the charge, as I've just had him drop back on the tower. We must have missed something beforehand, because he certainly was giving up no positions while we were live on him. But that has then elevated Christy Simon to P11. We have Ross Bartle sitting in P12, Wilfred Robson in P13, and it would have been... No, my times are all over on this chart. I'm going to do another restart of that director. It's not playing nice tonight. In fact, I'm going to give up on that one and use the alternate one for now, because it does seem like that's just going to let me down as far as the times go, especially when there are position changes going on like there were there. Just looking visually though, we did have Wilfred Robson, for whatever reason, before we got on board with him, dropping all the way down to P15, apologies. Now he's P17, he is in the pits though. So perhaps going off track, picking up some damage, leading to him making the call to now early pit. There we are, confirmation visually that he is certainly in the pits. His last lap before that, a 2:28.997. He does cross the line quite early entering the pits, so that would have been quite a bit of time loss on that in lap. So something must have happened that we did miss, which I can only imagine was in sector 1 that we did miss, because we did join him on the back straight, where he was then live updating to his time chart, to the tower, a little bit late. So he must have lost a lot of that, or the majority of it, if not all, through Sector 1 and the S's. I'll have to try and recollect myself on this race director. I do see a much clearer picture of timings for the first time this race. We have Johan van der Merwe as one of the few men under the second. We do have the trigger pulled by Marcus Steyn, though. He's come into the pits. He looked to still be less than a second behind Ryan Barrington-Smith when he did, so that well could be a strategy call from him, getting into the pits early. Perhaps felt like he either the tires were going a little bit earlier than expected, perhaps feeling like he had the pace to outrun Ryan Barrington-Smith, but just couldn't follow, and was perhaps doing worse to his tires. Chris Heineke, hardest Boyser, also in the pits, so this could be something that I was not quite aware of, being that the tire wear on this track would be tricky. And perhaps this is one of those few tracks we'll have a two-stopper in. Time will tell. I do see quite a few of them flooding in now, though. Chris Heineke's in there, hardest Boyser, and is that Roxanne Bartle. And Marcus Steyn is spending quite a bit of time in that pit box, though. Perhaps any kind of damage that he might have picked up, I'm not sure. Or he's just decided to underfuel himself for the first stint. I'd go as far as to say that didn't pay off as much as you would expect it to, as he did find himself sitting behind Ryan Barrington-Smith for the majority of that stint. This could also play into what I hoped was our reason for Nick Hodgson dropping back a bit of pace, was perhaps that he has got a little bit of a, let's say, strategy ace up the sleeves, eking out his tires, and perhaps trying to turn this into a one-stopper over some other cars' two stoppers. Only time will tell. He does have a Johan van der Merwe firmly positioned in front of him, so that is a position change we did miss. But also all over the back of him, less than 4/10 adrift between current P2 and P3 on track. Of course, provisionally that's going to change if Marcus Steyn can maintain his pace coming out of the pits. He was certainly, and as I say that, Nick has now dived into the pits, so bang, out the window goes that strategy idea. It seems like I feel confident to say I'll use that as a benchmark to say that two-stop is most likely on. If this did come down to tire wear, is most of the reason why these men are pitting early, but I would expect to know that answer within the next 15 to 20 minutes. Anybody who's pitting then after the 30-minute mark is going for a one-stopper or a balanced approach to this race. These quite well could also be early pit stops taken due to some kind of, let's say, difficulty following some of the other cars. Sean Herrera also now pits from P7 on track. He was provisionally P10 before these front runners started pitting as well. So just to take that into account, we'll see where he does come out. Still have the majority of the field that has decided to stay out for now. Then we also have a switched on me. We also have a few men still up at the top who have decided not to pit. Ryan Barrington-Smith seems to be gathering good momentum with some of his times, so he's managing to keep it fairly consistent. I guess he'll back himself to be able to pit later and still maintain that lead. Marcus Steyn did previously have the quickest time of the quickest lap of the race. I do see him doing quite well on his deltas. He is dropping a little further back from Ryan Barrington-Smith. The tires will still be coming up to pressure, of course, only just leaving the pits, but that is officially 9 drivers who have, sorry, 8 drivers who have pitted, of course, with Ron Heineke's unplanned pit stop as well early on. So essentially on strategy, that would be 7 of them, where this was a strategic call and not forced. So we'll see how that plays off as we have Johan van der Merwe and Alex Buitendag now pulling into pit road. Temperature has only risen 1 degree from qualifying state. So I would expect that perhaps nothing seems to be taking the drivers unawares as far as the weather standpoint goes. It looks like it's going to be partly cloudy now, partly cloudy in 10 minutes, and in 30 minutes towards the end of the race. So we're going to have around no change there. Track temperature, ambient temperature remaining as it was at the start of the race. Track temperature up by 1 degree. May quite well be residual temperature from the cars and the rubber going across it. But then this isn't going to be what catches anyone unawares for now. We do see them holding quite well as far as most of their times are going. Their last few times looking down the tower is pretty consistent amongst most drivers. There has been around a 2 to 3 second time loss for those who have not pitted yet. Having spoken about pit stops, we have P10, P11, P12 and P13 all coming into the pits. That's position on track at the time. So that sees the majority of our field, and the leader has now pitted. So we'll keep an eye on that. Brandon Holthausen would be the longest or the highest runner up who might be able to take provisional lead on track, but we'll see how long he can extend as well. Remember, he was the man who found himself in a bit of an island, getting quite lonely out there, but this will give him a nice reminder that he's still got something to race for here perhaps, and always having the race lead attached seems to bring out the best in most drivers. Suddenly wakes you up and reminds you that there's a lot to fight for here, regardless of whether you are truly fighting for that P1 spot or not. Where is, I think it's just a late update on timing towers. Yes, because there we are. Ryan Barrington-Smith, P2 on track now. We have Paul Fent, who's also come into the pits now, as well as, no, that was a Johan van der Merwe leaving. So just 4 runners now currently. I take that back. That is Neil Bullion. So that will remain 2 runners now who have not pitted, which includes your provisional race leader, Brandon Holthausen, and Dani Steenkamp further down in P8 currently. I was unawares of the position he was in before this all started, but just based on where Iron came out quite a good deal away ahead of Marcus Steyn, at least on the current tower times, and yes, it looks to be fairly accurate. He has found himself quite a gap between himself now and Marcus Steyn, to looking like it is fairly accurate on that tower to say around 6.5 plus seconds. So that difference that's quite a difference he's made. I'd very much like to see that's the difference between a 2-stopper and a 1-stopper perhaps. But if that is the case, then Marcus Steyn would have left himself with a mountain to climb now, having to claw all that time back and use up as much time as tire as he can. You would expect he would need to be ahead the next time he pits if he still stands a chance to win this race. And Brandon Holthausen now pulling into pit road. That would leave 1 man on track, being Dani Steenkamp, who has not boxed first time. And I'm still very interested to know and understand whether that was a 1-stopper for the majority of these drivers. or if that is just one of two to come. So order is restored at the top end now with all the drivers having pitted. So we resume with Ryan Barrington-Smith at P1 and Marcus Steyn in P2. However, there has been a noticeable increase in that gap between P1 and P2. I can only think that the best strategy we mentioned earlier with the pitting would be to leave as little fuel as possible to put into the tank. Perhaps the difference also being made between tires. I wouldn't think it would be that little of a difference, being 6 seconds perhaps. I would think it would be a little bit more than that to change the tires, as much as 20 to 25 seconds. So that shouldn't be the difference between them. I didn't notice whether Marcus Steyn was held up in traffic much. While having said that, I would like to pop down to Paul Venter, who seems to have found himself behind Chris Heinicke. So we've missed that somehow. I stand to be corrected. He is ahead of Chris Heinicke at just a late update on the time charts. So that is one that we did unfortunately miss. I'm going to take a chance to rewind replay, and that didn't grant us the closure we were after. And the unfortunate winner of the first drive-through penalty award goes to Bullion, who's we see quite clearly on the timing charts has come up now. From what I've experienced in the drivers chat building up to this race, this seems to perhaps be the first of many that may come for a lot of these drivers. A lot of them mentioning that it was exceptionally difficult to stay within the track limits of the circuit. Let's say, to refer to iRacing's reference of it, X's to be found everywhere. And this is Bullion now pulling in, getting rid of that drive-through penalty as quick as he possibly can. Unfortunate, but I'm sure he won't be the only one to have to hold that red flag of drive-through on his time charts. Jumping up, I do see quite a bit of separation between the drivers. Brandon Holthausen is closing distance to Dani Steenkamp, but let's not forget that Dani is still the sole driver currently, still to take his planned pit stop. Oh, but taking no prisoners as he coasts himself through middle track apex to not allow Brandon to take that easily from him. So it'll be interesting to see, because Brandon found himself in a let's say a pace of his own. Not fast enough to keep up with the drivers ahead, but definitely fast enough to maintain gap and not be caught by anyone behind him previously in P5. So I'm sure he would have been frustrated to see the only runner to not pit not allow him through a little bit easier than that. But that's out of the way now. That's all done and dusted. He can get back to his racing, and he will hopefully be looking to close up a bit of ground on Nick Hodgson now, because that gap, which was some 4.5 seconds earlier, has come down to 2.5 seconds after the pit stops now. So again, wondering how much how and where the drivers might have lost that little bit of time. Perhaps it's all on the pit entry, getting as late on the braking and as close as you dare to that pit line to avoid a speeding violation on the pit road. But that could well be the difference maker for some of these cars, having seen that at least 2 seconds to be found, and in the case of between P1 and 2, quite a lot of time, in fact, right up to 6 to 7 seconds. Still wondering where that might have been found as the case. We do see our second drive-through penalty award go to Chris Heinecker, so that's unfortunate, because he looked to be in such a strong position, climbing up the field 4 spots from the grid up to P6, but unfortunately having an off-track excursion earlier seems to have been the start of a domino effect in him losing a bit of time and claiming himself too many off-tracks as well in the process. But I think as it would look like a round of pit stops almost, we'll probably see a few of those come through. Perhaps that was also part of the strategy as they were intending to play it, knowing that a drive-through was going to come around or just after the midpoint of the race, and perhaps getting the pit stop out of the way early, thereby a drive-through not being too close to their existing pit stop plan, and allowing them to be able to use up lap time both before and after drive-through gets awarded. I'm expect the rules would apply the same here, that you do have 3 laps to serve your drive-through penalty, as we see a little bit of a battle going on to the pit line there. And that is Danny Steenkamp, of course, just ahead of Chris, who is taking his first planned pit stop at last. So it will be interesting to see how many positions that might have gained him. But indeed, that was quite a brave maneuver to leave it that late on a track like this. But I think he's done quite well. He didn't seem to be losing too much pace to those who had pitted, perhaps bar a Paul Fenter, who was, or rather Brandon Holdhausen, who was all over the back of him for quite an extended period of time. And that's Chris, who's shaken off his drive-through penalty. He does find himself, I think, a little bit higher than the timing tower suggests right now, but looks like he might have come out. So I'll wait for that to update, I guess, before I give a live feed. I was expecting him to come out around about where Flip Van Sale was, but it looks like it might have got a little bit more time loss. Quite a long pit lane at COTA, quite a slow entry as well. And I'd say that was a little bit of sideways action coming out of that S section. So he's clearly on a bit of a push, but will need to get the tires up to temperature before he can extract the best lap times from them. So we do see Hardus Boyser being hassled from behind by Alex Buitendach as well. That is probably our best battle on track right now, where he's got it down into half a second. And is that Jeremy de Villiers as well? Yes, it is, in the background, who is barely 3/10 and looking to just sticking the nose out, making it known he's there, but perhaps wasn't quite there for the overtake yet. If he can hold that ground going towards the back straight. I do see that the pressure could be paying off a bit on Alex Buitendach, who's allowed him a move up the inside, and quite easily done, very well done in fact, by Jeremy de Villiers, who sailed through into P9 now. And I think one of the winners of that pit cycle as well was Sean Loureiro. If I remember right, he found himself in a P9 beforehand. He's now in P7, quite comfortably ahead of this battling pack that's up behind him. So he's done very well to create himself quite a bit of distance. Of course, quite a long way to go to Paul Venter ahead of him. But that's definitely 2 positions gained from what I can estimate before the pit stops, perhaps even 3. So he's done quite well to be one of the gainers of the pit stop cycle. Of course, let's not forget that Ryan Barrington-Smith has gained quite a bit of time as well to find himself comfortably in P1. Also, going unawares was the fact that he has put up the fastest lap of the race in that time, which on the time chart says a 2:06.0. So that is definitely, that's about 2/10 on the fastest time previously set from Marcus Steyn, who has so far not improved that. In fact, it is over 2.5 So that's Ryan Barrington-Smith finding quite a bit of time after his pit stop, and is now actually checking out quite a bit. He's increased that gap steadily from around 7.9 seconds up to the 9.6 mark that you see on screen now. And that's exceptional driving from him, definitely staking his claim to come home in the prime spot come the checkered flag. And for now, seeing the gap between himself and Marcus Steyn, as well as the further gap then between Marcus Steyn and Johan van der Merwe, who is also sitting quite comfortably in P3 at the moment. You would expect that they don't have too much to worry about, no stress to be had at the moment, and can just put their eyes ahead and bang out the times that they need to, bar anything going wrong, of course. We haven't noticed too many back markers that have come out to play through these front runners. I think the pit stops landed up quite synced to be able to allow very little hold up. At the most, I think I could mention a Dani Steenkamp, who was holding someone up, but to be fair, that was for track position at the time, as he had not pitted. So that's reasonable, let's say, within the bounds of racing. Jeremy de Villiers and Alex Buitendach have both closed right up to Hardus Boyce again. So they want to make it known that they are there, they are ready to pounce. In all of that as well, I do see Chris Heineck has made his way up a couple of positions after that drive through, and he looks like he is all over the back of Flip van Zyl at the moment as well. Although we probably, yes, we've missed that position change, in fact, but he's then done well to get himself up into P12, has Chris. And he'll be looking to climb back through after that drive-through, perhaps spurred on by the fact that there will be a few others coming for other drivers. Witnessing him go wide at the double right-hander through this third to last corner, though, he won't want to do too many of those, or he might find himself with one more trip into pit road in this final 20 minutes. And in all of that, we have again missed, this time I'm definitely going to take a chance to go quite far back so we can actually witness the overtake. But Hardus Boyce looks like he's dropped back 2 positions, relinquishing that P8 position to Jeremy de Villiers, and in the process P9 to Alex Buitendach as well, as we approach it. So it's coming into the last corner now. And there was a little bit of contact. But all fair, he was just overtaken, trying to get a good run out of the apex, but that did allow him a chance to get ahead momentarily. But the switch back is... oh, and there's more contact. Looks like Jeremy de Villiers was trying to carry as much speed as possible. That perhaps a little harder than the previous. That's definitely off-settled Hardus a little bit, having to also then give up the second position. To be fair, that was just close racing incidents, let's say, where perhaps T1, knowing that a certain George Russell had run wide into a certain red car of Carlos Sainz last season, and being able to be given very little punishment from it, I think is characteristic as well, to indicate that T1 is a corner that it's part of the racing line to run quite wide there, especially with how tight it does apex. You would expect that very little of that would be intentional. It's just a little bit easier to point your car a bit too straight towards the exit curb in a battle moment. That's never going to look as pretty as it could, but obviously still fair racing. Hardus is dropping off the back of those two in ahead, Jeremy de Villiers and Alex Buitendag, so that I would expect is perhaps a slight bit of damage, but also the indication that he was struggling to hold position and time ahead of Jeremy and Alex. Whilst that said, Jeremy is not pulling away from Alex, so he might well feel Alex Buitendag that there could be something on for him should he just manage to keep on to the back of Jeremy for now. Now that he's been unleashed, let's say, from behind Hardus Bursa, then he is not pulling away yet, but that P8 is where we're seeing the most action, the battle for on track at the moment. And looking back a little bit, we do actually see Chris Heineke catching the back of Roxanne Bartel now, and could look to get a move done by the back straight, approaching the brake zone now, and there he is alongside and up the inside. The move looks complete, but Roxanne will not fight it as much then. So Chris comfortably now into P11, and we'll see if Roxanne can perhaps hold on to the back of him and see if she can sneak that position back. You would think that Chris is I wouldn't stretch to say driving angry at the moment, but definitely driving to make up quite a bit of time that may have been lost through the drive-through. Unless I've missed one, we have actually only had 2 drivers complete drive-through penalties so far, and we are now down to less than 14 minutes to go in this race. So that has actually turned out to be perhaps a bit of a cry of wolf from some of the drivers. There were definitely at least 5 or 6 that I noticed mentioning track limits and how they are certainty headed for drive-through penalties, but you never know how much of that might just be pre-race banter, trying to catch a few drivers off guard or give them more hope than they realize they have coming into the race. I can't be quite sure how he's done it, but we do see Ryan Barrington-Smith has extended that lead to now 13 seconds over Marcus Stain. So barring any commentators' curses, I'd say that has fairly much settled the podium at the moment. I'm sure Nick Hodgson will have something to say about it. He's not too far back from Johan van der Merwe currently. sitting just shy of 2.3 seconds behind P3, and there you can see, well, he won't be doing himself any favors going over those violent sausage curbs on the exit of the final corner, but he's definitely not allowing Johan a chance to sit back yet, looking to claim that podium spot that he did land up losing fairly early on in the race, or rather dropping back fairly early on in the race and losing it before the midway point. So he definitely has something to drive for. Looking ahead, he can still see that car quite easily rounding all the exits. I'd say those sausage curbs have done him no favors, both to his times and perhaps the undercarriage of the car. Of course, these cars not relying on any form much of ground effect at all, but the diffusers, both at the front and the rear, certainly will take a bit of a pounding and offset a little bit of aero, especially on the rear tires through a track where it's so demanding to maintain speeds through the apexes such as COTA. And putting a quick eye on the chat, so we do see a mention from Ervier Mare, who unfortunately couldn't drive tonight from load shedding, has said, Loureiro, great recovery, mate, and certainly has done quite well to slip himself up into P7 exceptionally well, both to recover from early issues and then in the pit stops to be able to jump up 2 positions like that. There's a high bullet as well from Avir, so I don't know who that's. At Sean Stradum. That's in the chat. A go Ruan, who I predict would be for Ruan Heineke. He's got quite a task ahead of him to make up any position at the moment, unfortunately. And also go Johan Jr., who I'm going to guess may well be Johan van der Merwe. We've seen him lose about 1.1 second to Nick Hodgson behind over the last lap and a half, after Nick's little excursion out in the final corner. But then if he can maintain this pace, he may well be on to fight for that 3rd position before the checkered flag. There are less than 10 minutes remaining in this race, so it's now or never for a lot of these drivers. Having looked back as well, we see that it was Jeremy de Villiers who has put on a little bit of a gap now between himself and Alex Buitendach. So it looks like he did find the time he needed once he cleared Hardest Boyser, who unfortunately has dropped quite a bit back. I would predict after the 2 moments of contact that probably has caused some damage with the car, unable to keep up with these 2 now. And I'd like to keep my eye on Nick Hodgson, who is definitely catching Johan van der Merwe at a rate of knots. And we're likely to see him get right up in the rearview mirrors before the end here. And in fact, probably within the next couple of laps at the pace he is going. You have to wonder how much of the rubber Johan van der Merwe has taken out of his tires, if he can still fight this and try and maintain some lap times to keep himself ahead. But we look to be finding out soon enough. Now he's just about brought that distance or gap to under 1.5 seconds. We may as well call that 1.5 seconds. So in the last sector or 2, only taking about 1/10 off. So it seems like Johan finally might have noticed that there was some distance closing down from between himself and Nick Hodgson, and perhaps it was time to get into the next gear. He's only gently bringing that time down now. We do see Bullion has taken the second drive-through of his excursion tonight. So that was one honest gent in the chat, definitely confirming that he would have issues with the track limits here. And I'll also go as to say that anybody else who is on a risk of a drive-through now could see that ruin their race a bit if they manage to get that in the last 7 minutes now of the race. And just a reminder as well, will be having podium interviews, provided the drivers do join me on the podium afterwards. So that is the plan, and we will hopefully have quite a bit to bring you towards the end as well. The timer though is still having just under 6 minutes left of this race, and based on this little battle that's stewing between Nick Hodgson and Johan van der Merwe, I think Nick definitely has a few more words to give out before we see the checkered flag. And again, I see Alex Buitendach perhaps heard me and wasn't happy with the words I mentioned. He's closed that gap down to just over half a second. So he's taken half of that gap off already. Perhaps noticing that it's going to be now or never. That clock is not getting any younger, and he needs to really push up now. And if he wants to take that P8 from Jeremy, in which case they have almost been battling most of this, if not all of this race, for a position in some way, and losing out a position each to Sean earlier, when Sean Loureiro had a good pit stop strategy to make up 2 positions. Perhaps they both aren't happy right now with the positions they find themselves in, and that extra 1 up or point would make all the difference for their night. And that gap's steadily coming down as well. So he's looking for his opening, is Alex Buitendach. Casting an eye further up to Nick Hodgson, that gap has now increased between himself and Johan van der Merwe. So perhaps Johan was saving something in the tank, so to speak, for these last few laps. Just making sure he was still left with some tire to be able to fight that off with, and he now has decided to use that to effect in pulling away. Nick's still fighting it back from what I can see. He's brought that back down to 1.7 seconds, but will that be enough? We are closing into perhaps the last 2 laps of this race now, so he's going to have to also make that a now or never situation. Back to Alex Buitendach and the Jeremy de Villiers situation at the moment. He's not let him get away, has Alex, but Jeremy is definitely doing well to maintain that gap and perhaps increase it just a little bit, enough to stay out of the slips, to not give the toe to Alex, to be able to strongly get alongside. For now, it's just who can follow the closest, but through the S's as well, that would be the difference maker. Haven't seen too many drivers be able to stick on them through the S's and allow themselves an overtaking opportunity into the hairpin, or even out of the hairpin onto the back straight. It seems to be probably the hardest place to follow on the track. And Alex going a little bit sideways there, doing himself no favors with the time. So that would have taken out any thought at perhaps towing him down the back straight to earn some kind of attempt at that position. And that up ahead is a back marker. Although I can't tell who right now. Is not going to be found out by flipping through. So it looks to be an LNR car. Could make a little difference there, perhaps give Alex Buitendag that one last chance to be able to make some magic here and have something happen, but it is just about being there at the right time. She is still struggling to close that gap enough to put him on the back of Jeremy de Villiers. That is in fact for position as well. I did not notice that is Sean Loureiro. So that was that's an LT Racing, apologies, not an LNR car. So that is actually for position. They've landed up pushing each other to close up right to the back of Sean Loureiro, who you'd have to say earned that spot rightfully with some decent driving tonight. So he'll have to hang on right to the line now. Just to flip quickly to the leader to see, he has just started the final lap. So these three will still have 1.5 just about laps to go now. And there we see Jeremy going up the inside. He's made it quite narrow, has Sean. He's not giving up any prisoners here. He might still have a chance to go around the outside. He has slowed the car a bit too much, looking to go back up the inside on a cutback, which turns into the outside here. You'd almost say move done, because it is not going to be a task that can be completed going around the outside of that double right-hander. But you have to wonder now, has that given up a chance to Alex Buitendag as well? Sean's found himself in an uncomfortable sandwich now, looking like he had earned himself the right to P7, has had to unfortunately give it up to Jeremy in the second to last lap of the race. He'll do well to still hang on to is my timing chart. My timing chart is not wrong to say we have seen all of these three drivers gain a position. To try and figure out who that was from now, though. We might have had a disconnection, because I do suddenly see 18 drivers on the track. That would be Nick Hodgson. We have lost Nick. Ah, that is unfortunate. He was headed for a almost guaranteed P4 there, and still looking at the back of P3, licking his lips, but it looks like he's actually been Unfortunate disconnect, and the leader does come across the line, so a quick jot back to Ryan Barrington-Smith. An absolutely exceptional drive from him tonight. He's been in a class of his own, especially after the pit stops. He created quite the gap between himself and Marcus Steyn, who we see still has not yet crossed the line. So that's the gap, is looks like just under 20 seconds. Yes, indeed, a 20-second gap perhaps between himself and P2 and Marcus Steyn. We do have Johan van der Merwe that has not yet crossed the line, but he will... Oh, he has crossed the line. So he did come home in P3 in the end, and that completes your podium. Sadly, we missed the chance for Nick Hodgson to be able to fight to get a final podium spot back, as we cast our eyes back to the last battle, a valid battle that's occurring on track at the moment between this three-way of Jeremy de Villiers, Sean Loureiro and Alex Buitendach. Exceptional driving from Sean, though, to be able to hold on to that now P7 after Nick's disconnect. So he'll be thankful for that in a way. Unlucky and unfortunate for Nick, but Sean's at least got himself back to the position that he was forced to surrender to Jeremy. But that's also seen Jeremy climb up 2 positions unexpectedly instead of the 1. And that we could just have one more battle towards the back, where we do see Gavin Scruton and Flip van Sale. And looks like Flip is just about a second ahead. They're coming up to the last corner now. Last chance saloon. And Gavin gets right up to the back of him, but there's no opening there to be able to make the pass. So congrats to the front 3 runners and podium finishers in Ryan Barrington-Smith, Marcus Steyn and Johan van der Merwe. We'll have a look if they are perhaps in the booth to be able to put on. And we do have 2 of them so far. So neither of them the race winner yet, but we'll pull them in, let's say, one at a time from the back this time round, expecting our race winner might still join us. Good evening, Johan. I'm good, thank you. How are you doing? So, tell me about your race. P3 at the end, you had Nick holding on to the back of you for a bit. Unfortunately, looks like he disappeared from a disconnect, but how was that battle until then? Ah, that's good to hear. And yeah, well done for basically popping up, let's say, quite consistent laps as well, from what I was noticing. You guys did well to, especially the top 4 or 5 guys who were putting in some stellar lap times and not making it easy. So congrats on the P3 and grabbing the podium. Ah, good job. And Marcus Steyn, P2, quite a battle going on in the first stint, and especially the first 10 to 20 laps, let's say, where it looked like you and Ryan Barrington-Smith were really giving it horns, pulling away from the pack there. But then he somehow got quite a few seconds gap from the pit stops cycle and then pulled away a bit. But tell us about your race. Okay, so that does explain the part we missed. Was wondering how you lost a bit of time, because your your delta seemed to be keeping fairly positive through that, but that explains a lot then. But he also did enter a bit of a class of his own, let's say. Once the pit cycles had completed, he just seemed to pull away completely. But then obviously, yes, difficult to stay within track limits, and you don't want to risk that drive through. It'll take away that podium chance perhaps. There, I do see, I was just about to mention, I haven't seen Ryan pop in, but here he comes. Ryan Barrington-Smith, congratulations on the win. How did your race go? Tell us about it. Oh, so Marcus just gave us a bit of an insider track because we did miss it, but he did lose a little bit of time behind the back markers. But to be fair, you also pulled into a bit of a league of your own after that to gain a lot of time from P2. I think you finished just shy of 20 seconds in the end. And the majority of that time was made up, let's say, in the last 15 laps. So you did really well then to actually pull away, rightfully claim that P1 spot. A great race. And I haven't had the chance to check yet. I did forget to. Do any of you guys know what is the next race on the calendar? Okay, let's try and check that quickly. 1, 2, no, I can't really remember. Is it Zolder? Ah, okay, that's what I wanted to say. I think Zolder is the next track. So what are your thoughts on that? Nice one. Well, thanks again for the great racing, guys, especially from the top 3 runners. Looked like you were putting on a display there. So yeah, thanks again. And we'll see you guys at Zolder in 3 weeks. Oh, cheers. And you'll be able to see my power has gone completely off in the background. But then that will be it for tonight as well. So do join us in the in 3 weeks time at Zolder for the next round 3 of simGT. From me, it's good night. Thank you to the racers for all the great racing, the good few battles we saw. They've conquered a bit of a demanding track, but we will see you in 3 weeks for Zolder to be even more demanding. Take care, all. Good night.